Start with the history of scriptural reasoning. It's actually started as a Jewish practice, which was called textual reasoning. And it happened between groups of Jewish philosophers and groups of Jewish text scholars. And each group thought that the other one had lost the plot. The philosophers thought that the text scholars were stuck back in the past. And the text scholars thought the opposite of the philosophers. They thought they were so carried away with postmodern thinking and post-liberalism and all this stuff, and they didn't actually know where they'd come from. They didn't know the Torah, they didn't know the Talmud. So they were coming from two different directions, both calling themselves Jewish. And they decided they were going to sit down together, bring philosophical texts and bring biblical and Talmudic texts, and they're going to study together. And this would be a way of bringing them both into connection with one another's worlds. And it was such an exciting and fiery dynamic going on that when a few Christian people were invited just to sit around the edges and look, they said, wow, this is something really amazing. Can we bring a few Christian colleagues, come and sit down with you and make this not just an inter-Jewish practice, but actually an interfaith practice? So the Christian people came down and they sat down with Christian texts and Jewish texts and started studying them together. And that was so fantastic that a few months or years later, some Muslim participants were invited along, and nowadays it is generally a three-faith Jewish, Muslim, Christian practice.
Well, basically, scriptural reasoning is about various people from various communities getting together around their scriptures and demonstrating to other people or other people of other faiths how they reason with their scripture, how they live with their scripture, how they interact with it, with a common sense of reverence for their own scripture, to build up a mutual understanding and a mutual respect for each other's texts. And of course, its relevance for today and other issues. For example, today the topic was wisdom or wise leadership, and how students engaging with the scripture can benefit and learn. What are the lessons to be learned from the text for today? But also, what are their own perspectives and their own experiences of the text? And you get all sorts of people from different backgrounds approaching it in different ways, and that was the whole point of the discussions. The format of the session was that Miriam and I briefly presented each text, the Quranic one and the Jewish text, and then we allowed the students then, through laying down the ground rules of scriptural reasoning, to engage and debate over the text themselves, while we sat in the background and monitored what was happening. And then later in the session we sat with them and joined them, also as participants but not as moderators of the group.
I've done it once before. We have a group in Manchester, so I went to that. But here I felt that we got much more into the text. We really, and because I knew the people I knew the people sitting around the table, it became much more personal, much more about me and the text and you and the text. And
actually, the most memorable part of the session was how members of one faith were genuinely beginning to understand the perspective and how other peoples of the other faith read their own text. And to a startling surprise, a lot was learned. And so I think that was very memorable and very important.
It really was beautiful. I remember at the end of one of the discussions in one of the Quranic pieces, there was an issue there which really confused me, and so I asked one of the Muslims in the group how she felt about it, and she was really honest, and I appreciated it. It wasn't what I believe at all, but the sense that, and they said this to us, that it's not a sort of thing where you're emphasizing I'm the same as you. You're emphasizing that we're different and we can live with that, and just kind of rejoicing in that difference and rejoicing in the fact that despite that we can get along.
Well, the most obvious way of using scriptural reasoning on campus is for students to come together over text and to see and discuss how and why religion can be a source of inspiration, compassion, cooperation, resolving conflicts, but also how texts often are abused and unjustified leaps are made to read violence into the text. And I think that's the very important aspect of what scriptural reasoning can do on campus.
I think one of the great powers that this approach will have on campus is that on campus it's not everyone on this course wants to get to know each other, and we have that will. But not everyone is like that. There's lots of people who are much more into their specific religion, and that the text for them is the centre of their religion. And this form of interfaith, which is something which I think that they can do, that they can appreciate, because they appreciate their own text, they can go and share that experience and share that approach to the text with someone else. And it means that what is a normal problem with interfaith, which is that it's basically just a fourth religion of the liberals of each religion, and it's very problematic in my opinion. It means that you can get beyond that, and you can approach a much broader spectrum of the religion.